Lincoln Financial Group is proud to present Homefront, Connecticut during World War II. This Connecticut Experience documentary tells the remarkable story of Connecticut's major role in World War II and its impact on Connecticut's economy and society.
The following Connecticut Experience presentation is part of the ongoing partnership between the Connecticut Humanities Council and Connecticut Public Television. Together, we're exploring Connecticut's rich history and culture.
This is the former New Departure Foundry in Bristol, Connecticut. During World War II, thousands of men and women from North America converged here to forge steel for ball bearings. The Allies depended on their work, for good reason. Without bearings, nothing moved, and Connecticut furnished some 80% of the American ball bearing supply. New Departure workers were hardly alone in the war effort. Connecticut and its citizens fought World War II in thousands of public and discreet ways across all its 169 towns. All citizens of the state endured hard work and sacrifice, grief and longing from 1941 to 1945. These became the daily rhythms of life when Connecticut went to war. December 1940, Waterbury, Connecticut. Above town, laborers harvested a thick pine from a nearby watershed and hauled it to the town green. There, among the elms, it would be the holiday centerpiece. For Christmas time 1940, Waterbury and Connecticut stood prosperous and at peace. Defense orders supported the local economy, yet fresh conquests by Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan seemed remote. The United States applied Connecticut's industrial muscle in the effort against Germany during World War I. A generation later, the state's factories stood ready for a call to arms. Yet memories of horrific casualties kept the state divided as Germany again threatened the continent.
The disillusionment with World War I was very strong in Connecticut during the 1920s. There's a strong peace movement, very active peace movement, and I think in general people felt that they had been burned. They had entered the crusade to make the world safe for democracy, and what they got out of it was a pile of debts that never got paid and a pile of dead bodies, and they had learned their lesson.
Connecticut's reputation as the Yankee land of small towns and steady habits had become myth rather than fact by the 1930s. A fifth of the state's population had been born overseas.
Connecticut was a very diverse state. It's a state that saw immigration, both the old stock immigrants of Irish and Germans and Northern Europeans, but also lots of them from Southern Europe too. So these are people who had a lot of stake still in Europe, something that was very dramatically shown in World War I.
The hamlet of Southbury, outside of Waterbury, turned out to be the unlikely site for a major political battle between the pro-Nazi German-American Bund and its opponents. Boone leader Fritz Kuhn and his followers secretly bought land and started working on a training compound. When town officials heard about it, they took action. Leaders told the FBI, and agents followed Boone members. Residents passed the town's first zoning law and effectively banned further work on the compound. Kuhn's followers who worked on the camp were later arrested by the FBI and jailed throughout the war. In 1938, Connecticut voters elected Stratford lawyer and Republican Assemblyman Raymond Baldwin as governor. Baldwin was a graduate of Wesleyan University in Middletown, a city that reflected the state's diverse political and social landscape. Voters also sent John Danaher of Meriden to the U.S. Senate in 1938. Haunted by the horrors of World War I, Danaher emerged as a leading spokesman for neutrality.
I saw my roommates and my classmates go out wishing to live, but willing to die in 1917. One was incinerated in a falling plane in Belgium. My own battery commander, with men I trained, went down when the Ticonderoga was torpedoed. We were told then, in identically the same phrases, without so much the change of an ounce, that the Kaiser was striving to gain world domination. There is not one simple slogan heralded today that wasn't used 24 years ago. John Danaher.
Arguments over the war tested the debating skills of students at Baldwin's alma mater, Wesleyan. Students proclaimed a strike against war in April of 1938 in hope that peace in Europe would persist. Hitler's aggressive moves in Europe fell just short of military action, but they nonetheless alarmed France and Britain. Orders from France and Britain alone lifted employment fivefold at engine maker United Aircraft in Connecticut.
United Technologies was flat on its back during the 1930s. Business was terrible, and when England began placing orders for airplanes and President Roosevelt began his preparedness moves here, well, United Technologies just exploded and became the biggest employer in the state. And the same thing is true of Electric Boat in Groton. These were industries that were limping along during the 1930s.
Nazi Germany attacked Poland on September 1st, 1939. Britain joined the battle in response and drew the United States closer to the European war. The Nazi offensive continued into Norway and the Low Countries. In spring 1940, armored columns swept into France, threatening Paris. The French capitulated in June. In Asia, meanwhile, Imperial Japan invaded China and threatened to do the same against other countries in the region. President Franklin D. Roosevelt launched a massive national defense program in May 1940. He called for 50,000 planes a year and $1 billion worth of armaments. Connecticut's aircraft engine, submarine, gun, brass, ordnance, and other plants attracted 100,000 workers in an 18-month period.
We had a lot of people from New York, Massachusetts, because in their state there was not that much defense work, you know. And people in Maine, we had a lot of people from Maine, because there's not much manufacturing up there, and people needed a job.
The state immediately felt the consequences of the boom. Mindful of the hard Depression years, landlords raised rents, evicting the poor. They told African Americans to look for rooms only in overcrowded, segregated neighborhoods.
African Americans that came into Hartford were shuttled to the north end of Hartford, and especially those who came up to work on the tobacco farms and menial jobs. They were all congregated together on the north end of Hartford, and many in cold water flats, tenement flats.
African Americans found it difficult to find high-paying production jobs as well. A presidential order barring discrimination in the workplace was ignored.
I was offered a job running the elevator, along with another little boy, high school graduate from Hartford High School. He had been operating broaching machines, and he took the job that they offered him, running an elevator. I refused and went on a one-man strike. They rigged up a job in machines. It was a washing machine for washing gun parts, greasy gun parts, and said, well, that's the machine. After that, I went to steward of the union at Coates, and he helped me to get placed in the correction and repair division at Coates Park Street Park.
Housing remained the top problem for many migrants drawn by high wages and little else. Trailer parks sprouted on vacant lots near defense plants. Families and relatives squeezed into rooms made for singles.
A man returned home at night about 11 o'clock after completing a day's work. As he entered the home, he saw by the dim hall light rows of human forms lying on the floors of his home. He lit a match to see better. He discovered members of his wife's family and a goodly number of his own. As he muttered an oath, there was a reassuring giggle from his bed and his wife's voice saying, "I've saved the bed for you." He was glad, reported his wife, and she further commented that the next morning he commanded that the relatives get going. Inez Hess, social worker, Bristol, Connecticut.
The federal government tried to meet the housing crisis by funding projects over fierce opposition from landlords and realtors. Permanent housing developments evolved quickly into distinct communities.
It was great. You met people from all walks of life, bankers and whatever. And these buildings here were built for war workers. And so it was a coal miner lived on one side of us, and an accountant lived on the other side of us.
Events in Europe and Asia triggered the first peacetime conscription in U.S. history. An estimated 246,000 Connecticut men between 21 and 35 registered for the draft in the fall of 1940. Governor Baldwin, meanwhile, formed a state defense council to oversee local preparations for war. President Roosevelt presided over the draft lottery in November. The first number drawn, 158. The inevitability of military service forced the hand of many young men. They decided to enlist rather than wait for their number to be called.
I was in college. I graduated University of Connecticut in June of 1941. And I decided to enlist. There was no war going on, but there was talk about everybody having to spend at least a year in the service. So I joined the Air Force. I was never even been in an airplane.
After a decade of scarcity, Connecticut looked forward to that bountiful Christmas of 1940. The young men drafted into military service were told they would train for a year and then be sent home for good. Most citizens who wanted work could find it, and at attractive wages. War remained the problem of Asia and Europe, not America. Washington, 1941. Voters re-elected President Roosevelt to a record third term in November. Inaugural parade organizers wanted to showcase America's military strength for the world to see. Instead, the parade revealed armaments that did not match the well-equipped armies of Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany.
We had nothing to fight with. We didn't have an Air Force. The Air Force was part of the Army.
The election of 1940 also sent Democrat Robert Hurley into Connecticut's governor's chair. Hurley was the state's first Roman Catholic governor. He inherited from outgoing Governor Baldwin a council to oversee civil defense. In addition, Hurley faced the grim task of sending the state's first National Guard units into active service. In February 1941, President Roosevelt ordered the Connecticut National Guard to Florida and Georgia for training. The Guard was part of the 43rd Division, whose duty roster was stocked heavily with soldiers from Connecticut and other New England states. Also that month, Hurley moved to end discrimination against African American draftees. Some local draft boards ordered the induction of African Americans on separate days from whites, or placed them on deferral lists. Hurley ordered the practices stopped. Going-away parties filled the state's social calendar for a month. The party for William Lane of Ansonia featured friends and co-workers from Farrell Birmingham, an Ansonia steelmaker. Lane's Garden Street neighbor and close friend, Florence Woodford, was one of the guests.
Dear Florence, I now have 2 weeks of Army life in back of me, and it seems like 2 years. They have rushed me around so much, I don't know where I'm at all. Rush, rush, rush. That's all it is. Your friend, Bill. William Lane, Ansonia, Connecticut, March 29, 1941.
As the Connecticut National Guard gathered at the State Armory for deployment to training bases in the South, the chaplain of the 169th Infantry Regiment of the 43rd Division, Neil J. Doyle of Waterbury, delivered a rousing sermon.
If we share with you the honors of this day and tribute of the American people, it is only because even the laborer of the 11th hour is held worthy of his hire. I think I speak the thought of all when I say that the dignity of this moment belongs to you, who have through the years just passed maintained the eternal vigilance that is the price of safety. First Lieutenant Neil J. Doyle, Chaplain.
To replace the National Guard, the state approved the formation of local militia units known as State Guards. These volunteer units were trained to guard bridges, power plants, and other vital locations, and fight rear-guard action against enemy invasion. State police, meanwhile, trained in guerrilla warfare. Governor Hurley visited the more than 8,000 troops from Connecticut at Camp Blanding, Florida, in July. He said the state stood squarely behind them and was willing to make the same sacrifices they were for the common defense. At the end of his visit, the men asked him for a piano. Hurley arranged delivery of one in September. As 1941 wore on, the debate over intervention grew amid intensifying defense preparations. The U.S. traded leases on British bases for ships and other material. In Asia, the United States sparred with Japan over oil. In Connecticut, the American Legion organized observation posts to guard against sneak attack. At Wesleyan, the political union scheduled its Sunday night debate on the resolution that the United States should fight Japanese aggression now. It set the event for the evening of December 7th. The question was never debated that night. Earlier, Japanese planes had bombed a U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii.
Well, I believe it was a Sunday. And Sunday afternoon, we always listened to a program on the radio. Radio was very important in those days, and I think it was The Shadow. But in any event, my brother and I were glued to the radio when they interrupted it with news about an event in Hawaii. Well, this didn't seem very important to us at all because we wanted to get back to our program. But my parents were terribly agitated about it. And I remember afterwards the talk was about nothing but Pearl Harbor for a long time.
I had learned to fly recently. I had learned to fly a seaplane out of Stamford Harbor. And I was on my way to Westport, Connecticut, because there was also a seaplane base there. And I was on the road going to Westport when I heard the news on the radio.
The December 7, 1941 Japanese attack on the naval base at Pearl Harbor killed 2,400 Americans, including 7 from Connecticut. The next day, President Roosevelt asked Congress to declare war on Japan. Germany declared war on the United States on December 10th. Shortly after the Pearl Harbor attack, a Hartford minister stood at his pulpit and quoted a poem about the legendary Dark Day of 1780. Huge plumes of smoke from forest fires in New York drifted into Connecticut and obscured the sun, scaring everyone.
This may well be the day of judgment which the world awaits. But be it so or not, I only know my present duty, and therefore, with all reverence, I would say, let God do his work, we will see to ours. Bring in the candles. Reverend Payson Miller.
War had come. Connecticut would have to bring in the candles once again, this time for the nation. London, 1940. Nazi bombers pounded the city day after day. After Pearl Harbor, Connecticut feared a similar German onslaught. The War Department placed volunteer air spotter stations on 24-hour alert. Civilian planes were grounded, airport beacons turned off, and air markings on buildings obliterated. On December 9th, rumors spread that German planes and U-boats threatened the East Coast. Schools closed, and children were sent home to await further instructions. The rumors were found to be false.
We weren't afraid of planes so much, but the subs. And there were rumors quite often about them being in the Sound and going up the river. And certainly we were concerned.
England's reaction to Nazi bombing provided the blueprint for Connecticut's preparations, including evacuation. Bridgeport, the state's largest city, would send its evacuees to the Massachusetts border and east. Waterbury's would head north. Hartford's would fan out in all directions except to the east. New Haven's evacuees would be directed as far north as Marlborough. New London's evacuation route pointed to the eastern hills.
My grandparents had a farm, and which my parents owned jointly with them. And the idea was that we would all make our way eventually to the farm, and that there we could raise vegetables, and my grandparents raised pigs, chickens, dairy cows, and that perhaps there we could have some sort of a normal life or resume it. And I don't know whether it was a dream or whether it was just their need to have some sort of a plan.
Greenwich and other southeastern Connecticut towns feared a massive exodus from New York more than Nazi bombers. They purchased barricades and planned to direct New Yorkers northward. Incendiary bombs that caused massive fires in London created the greatest fear in urban areas. Even a small air attack could ignite Connecticut's tinderbox cities. Civil defense authorities held drills to show how to extinguish incendiaries before it was too late. Air raid precautions served as the front line of home defense. Beginning in May 1941, volunteers built spotter huts on town greens and in remote hills. In cities, spotters stood atop municipal buildings and scanned the skies.
Local people manned these things in bitter cold and scorching heat 24 hours a day in the early years to look for enemy airplanes. As if there was any chance that they would come. I'm not sure there was any chance that they would come. Civil defense people, I have seen maps that civil defense volunteers had of their neighborhood, and where the home of each of their neighbors was labeled and where every entrance and exit was. In case there was an emergency, they could come in and help. So I think there was a feeling here, certainly, of this is a part of an important cause and we're willing to give of ourselves to it.
We had a phone line that we had to call, and every plane that flew over our territory within our range had to be reported. I don't think we ever had anything that shouldn't have been there.
School children learned how to survive an attack. Tests on whether homes and businesses would black out cities at night took place.
I remember one night a plane did fly over, and my father was very concerned. He didn't think it sounded like a normal plane that usually flew over our house. And we all gathered in one room, I remember, and we were quite scared. But it passed, and it wasn't anything to be concerned about. It was just a different plane, that was it.
Every time a plane went over, people would sort of look and react. And of course that disappeared after a while, but at the very beginning, there was a great sensitivity to what seemed to be a possibility of foreign attack.
You actually could not show a light, and at first it seemed frivolous. Imagine, blackouts. But there were, on the coast, we were near a naval installation in New London. We were near, a bridge. These could possibly have been targets if they ever got to our coast.
In April 1942, the Army further tightened restrictions when it ordered coastline towns in Connecticut and cities bristling with war plants to dim all lighting each night. Silhouettes generated by seashore lights made it easier for U-boats to find Allied shipping. And inland sky glow above cities might serve to direct enemy planes to their targets.
The Germans had a pretty powerful Air Force, and we were convinced that if the war went on too long, they'd get to us.
Electricity companies installed shields on streetlights. Drivers covered the upper half of their headlights and used low beams at night. Speed limits were reduced to 20 miles per hour. Blackouts and dimouts formed a part of a larger, more complex array of elements that led to fear and mistrust on the home front, particularly in the tense months after Pearl Harbor. Workers who used to breeze into plants now had to show identification cards for the first time. The state health department kept original birth certificates under double lock and key to prevent fifth columnists from using the papers to obtain work at critical war plants. The FBI arrested 92 Germans, 36 Japanese, and 30 Italians in Connecticut during intermittent sweeps.
It was extreme. I mean, for instance, there were, I think, 7 Japanese that were hauled into the police station and questioned. And I think that there was a Japanese restaurant on East Main Street that was forced to close because of the opposition of people.
Volunteer civil defense workers were fingerprinted. The FBI secretly told state officials of suspected communists in the Air Observation Service. Salvage drives thrived in the patriotic fervor unleashed by the attack on Pearl Harbor. Newspapers, nylon stockings, old pots and pans, and even old ointment tubes were collected for recycling. The government asked consumers to recycle cooking fats for ammunition and explosives.
You had to save your bacon grease and take it back to the butcher. And my mother was very patriotic, and she wouldn't always respect a butcher who did not want her bacon grease. And I don't know how they used that grease, but you brought it back in coffee cans, and they would give you a certain number of rationing points for it. And if the butcher wouldn't accept her grease, she would take her business somewhere else.
Such activities made sure that everyone was involved in some measure of the war effort, from children to the elderly. Students took part in buy-a-bomber campaigns. Volunteers who held full-time jobs found the energy to meet any community need. Bond drives and parades to boost sales were commonplace on city streets. Waterbury recycled its World War I vintage Victory House to serve as headquarters for bond and war stamp sales on the town green. Teenagers and young women joined formal and informal clubs to help entertain soldiers and sailors stationed in Connecticut.
Sundays from 3 to 9. We would bring cake, brownies, cookies, sandwiches. The American Legion ladies, the auxiliary ladies, would make coffee. We'd play records. We'd dance with the fellows and get around the piano and sing. And this is when somebody said, hey, we're not bad.
All of us are used to spending money for things that we want. Things, however, which are not absolutely essential. We will all have to forego that kind of spending because we must put every dime and every dollar we can possibly spare out of our earnings into war bonds and stamps. Because the demands of the war effort require the rationing of goods, of which there is not enough to go round.
Here's a plan that's fair and square. Everybody gets their share. No more griping anywhere. Get the point, Mrs. Brown. One for you and one for me. It's as clear as ABC. Share alike for victory. Get the point, Mrs. Brown.
President Roosevelt's call for sacrifice affected everyone almost immediately. In the face of total war, normality had to wait. Rationing and price controls were the order of the day. Tire rationing came first, just weeks after Pearl Harbor. New cars could not be sold after January 1st, 1942. Typewriters, shoes, and sugar would join the list before summer. Meat was rationed, but became scarce anyway. People waited in line for hours to buy cuts that, before the war, they wouldn't touch.
We had to be very careful about certain things. Sugar, I remember particularly. We had a certain number of pounds per person, I think, per month. And before that, sugar was unlimited. So we would measure our sugar into Barbasol or Burma shave jars, and everyone had one with their name on it. And we'd have them on the kitchen table or wherever we were eating, and we'd ladle out what we needed. But my brother and I didn't use any of our sugar, none in coffee or tea, of course. So our parents at the end of the month would have to take some of our sugar, and we would wheel and deal and make it available to them if they would give us certain things in exchange.
Most goods, some 8 million products in all, fell under elaborate and ever-shifting price ceilings and points set by the most hated agency of wartime, the Office of Price Administration. Some 14.5 million rental units also came under the OPA's rules. But it was gasoline rationing that seemed to threaten a mobile nation's freedom the most. On July 22, 1942, the federal government ordered gasoline rationing. Local rationing boards determined how gasoline would be distributed, from the ordinary A coupon for 240 miles per month to the unlimited mileage available under the X stamp. People call the ration booklets bingo sheets. More than 200,000 motorists, about half the state total, sought supplemental rations.
There is a tension between people's desire to sacrifice and willingly accept their A card and drive such a limited amount, and their willingness to buy on the black market and find places for gas.
Despite rationing, shortages of essential fuel and food developed in 1942 as the war effort consumed most of the nation's production. Nazi U-boat attacks on coastal shipping made things worse. The winter of 1942-43 was particularly harsh for the state's 350,000 homes heated with either oil or kerosene. The day after Christmas 1942, Governor Hurley declared a fuel emergency as stocks dwindled in the face of war demands and transportation bottlenecks.
We were renting a downstairs apartment in Deep River, and the old lady that owned the place lived upstairs. Well, it didn't bother her. She went to bed at 7 o'clock at night. But believe me, it was so cold there. There were times we sat on the radiator in order to keep warm.
Only an emergency supply of kerosene sent via truck from Albany to Connecticut kept the state from freezing. Real and potential food shortages, too, loomed for Connecticut. The war had forced a sudden change in diet from meat-based to cereal-based. The state imported most of its food even in good times. Now, transportation links favored cargo for war, not food for Connecticut. To avert a crisis, the state government launched its War Gardens program in January 1943 and encouraged residents to can what they couldn't eat. Citizens tended to some 158,000 gardens in 1943, much more than anticipated. The 4-H developed a program for children to follow.
We had a motto in 4-H during the war. It was, "Feed a fighter." And this was done by feeding the home front people because so much of the mass-produced food was shipped overseas. So gardening was stressed.
The people next to me decided to raise chickens for the war effort, and they had a huge chicken coop, so we were awakened quite early with the chicken cackling. And they had the droppings right on the border, and in the summertime it was horrible. And the doctor came up and he thought I should complain to the Board of Health, but they were good neighbors and everybody needed food. It was scarce. So I talked to the neighbor and he said, "The day war ends, the chickens will be gone." And he kept his word. That was it. And he cleaned up everything.
An invasion did occur in Connecticut after all, but it was the Americans who landed. Naval bases were expanded or established in New London and Groton. The Army encamped in state forests. The popular Hammonasset State Park closed in October 1942 to let the Navy use it for aerial gunnery training. A tobacco field north of Hartford in Windsor Locks was turned into an air base. It was named Bradley Field in honor of the first pilot from Connecticut killed in the war. Colleges, too, welcomed the armed forces. Wesleyan and Trinity trained thousands of naval officers. The University of Connecticut provided expert advice to farmers forced to increase production. Yale University hosted an Army Air Force unit that included jazz star Glenn Miller. He performed concerts in New Haven and elsewhere in the state. Overseas, the U.S. Army was on the march and the Navy under sail. The 43rd Division and its contingent of thousands of Connecticut soldiers, including William Lane of Ansonia, prepared to move in the South Pacific. They had taken part in the largest maneuvers ever. Lane wrote to his neighbor and friend, Florence Woodford.
Dear Florence, how I wish I could go skating some night. We did have some good times. Just wait till we get a hold of those Japs or Germans. They'll pay for this. Your friend Bill. William Lane, Ansonia, Connecticut.
In Asia, meanwhile, U.S. forces fell under the Japanese onslaught of early spring. Japanese forces battered American positions at Bataan and at Corregidor, forcing the U.S. to surrender its forces. Among the men taken prisoner at Bataan was John Bonnell of the small town of Lebanon, Connecticut. The Japanese Army forced Bonnell and thousands of other U.S. and Filipino soldiers to march to prison camp in searing heat, without food or water. The U.S. Navy won its first decisive victory of the war at Midway Island in June 1942. In November, Japanese forces gave up their battle for Guadalcanal. U.S. armored columns moved into North Africa. Casualty lists grew as the War Department issued fresh orders of battle on two fronts.
The people that I knew, I hesitate to say they were blue-collar people, but they were certainly not the upper echelon. So many of them had somebody in the service. And I'll never forget driving down Broad Street. We were going to work to do a job at Fafner Bearing, which was, New Britain was a tremendous hodgepodge of war industry. I mean, it just had all sorts of things going there. And I remember driving down Broad Street, which I believe was predominantly Polish. There was not a building that didn't have the flag in the window showing that there was somebody in the service. And, there was more than a few silver and gold stars indicating wounded or even a death.
Back at Wesleyan, editors reflected on the first year of the war.
On the whole, Wesleyan's reaction to the opening blow was much like that headless chicken feeling, mingled in one great swelling emotional surge. Yet to come were the slackening ardor, accompanying the college-as-usual behavior, the irritating annoyance of rationed gasoline, sugar, tires, meat, and coffee, the dull sorrow of friends lost, the final recognition of the problem's magnitude. The Wesleyan Argus, Monday, December 7th, 1942.
The terms of total war put home front workers on equal footing with servicemen on the battlefield. The need to produce a staggering array of war goods triggered a revolution in the workplace. Opportunities for women and minorities opened for the first time on a large scale.
Connecticut was not dominated really, except for United Technologies, by one or two major firms. And we had a lot of small firms that quickly adapted to war production.
Pratt Reed Company was one such business. A manufacturer of piano striking mechanisms before the war, the company applied its skills during it to make gliders.
the Army did not think that we were qualified to make such a plane. They had this gentleman who, he was not really Army, but he was associated with the Army. His name was Lauren Wheeler. And he talked to them and he said to give them a chance. And so they said, okay, they would give us a chance to see what we could do. And 85 days later, the first Waco glider came off the line.
Before the draft began in September 1940, small firms complained that larger companies were stealing their workers as defense work grew dramatically. But slowly, and under threat of government sanction, factories began hiring women and minorities to replace men who had gone to war or found other jobs.
January 41 was when I went to Winchester's and applied for a job, and I got hired in the radiator shop. My sister got hired in the office. Now, like I said, I went to commercial. I took bookkeeping and typing and shorthand and whatever, but you just couldn't get a job those days.
Single women were recruited first for factory work. Then mothers, even those with preschool children, took jobs. To free mothers for war work, the federal government built daycare centers for children. But with extended families intact, mothers overwhelmingly preferred to leave children with relatives.
My typical day was getting up at 6-something and getting my son fed and dressed. And fortunately, my parents lived almost in the next house. And my mother took care of my youngster. And then I went to work on the gliders.
Unlike the recruiting poster of a riveter sternly going to work in neat overalls and bandana, factory work was dirty, noisy, and often dangerous.
I was working in the glider factory. People in the sewing room sewed these tremendous covers and pulled them over the fuselage. And we covered it with, painted it with this stuff we called it dope. We had to tape every one of the seams, every one of the struts where the cloth touched it to reinforce it. And then we had to rub it down with our hands. And our hands would be so covered with this glue that had hardened. We would go into to take a break, we'd go into the ladies' room to have a cigarette and light up the cigarette, and our hands would go up in flames.
The workforce of women was hardly restricted to the factory floor. Men who worked in service industries like gas stations needed to be replaced too. Some women replaced husbands who went off to war.
We took care of cars when they came in. She would take care of one end, or I would take care of the other end. We checked oil, we checked gas, we checked their batteries, we washed their windows. They got perfect service, and everybody was very nice to us. And all the while we worked there, nobody said as much as damn.
In November 1942, Raymond Baldwin defeated Robert Hurley in the Connecticut gubernatorial election. Within weeks of taking office, he faced a crisis over labor shortages that would persist throughout the war. The War Department, concerned over the ability of labor-starved areas to meet critical production, placed 4 Connecticut cities on a list of 32 across the country. These cities, Bridgeport, Bristol, Hartford, and Waterbury, would no longer receive contracts unless they met production guarantees. In March 1943, Baldwin suspended state laws that prevented women from working after 10 at night and from working more than 48 hours a week. Labor unions were furious, but the order stood. Thousands of black workers from Jamaica, Barbados, and the Deep South were brought to Connecticut to work. Initially invited to Connecticut's farms for seasonal work, Many stayed permanently to work in factories. Some managers blamed the labor shortage on laziness or drinking. The truth was more complex.
The soldiers, hard and grim as their life is, are at least planned for and cared for. They have cars that function when cars are possible. They have periods of rest when they've done a stint of duty. All the chores of material living are lifted from their shoulders as far as possible. The defense worker, on the other hand, cannot, after his or her day's work, leave his home problems on someone else's shoulders. He cannot get parts, tires, or service for his car. He cannot get all the food he needs. What he does get is in such driblets that he has to spend a good deal of time after nearly every working day in the search for food. Tires are smooth, cars wearing out, not a handful of mechanics in all the surrounding territory to keep the cars in condition. Do not overlook the fact either that these are not people remote from the war, intent only on money. Practically every one of them has a son, husband, or father in the armed forces. To help them is the motivating force of practically everyone. Dorothy C. Washington, Director of Women Personnel, Bath Iron Works Corporation, Maine, 1943.
Against this backdrop of labor shortages and tensions created by the entry of workers traditionally barred from production lines, companies went to work. They produced war goods in colossal amounts. In Waterbury, the War Department placed massive orders for artillery shells with the city's brass companies within hours of the Pearl Harbor attack. Thousands of workers moved to an 84-hour week to meet the demand. Electric Boat had already boosted production from 1 submarine a month to 12 in the same time. Now the Navy wanted more and would get it. Ball bearing plants in Bristol, Meriden, New Britain, and Plainville produced their goods by the millions, accounting for some 80% of all ball bearing production in the United States. Pratt & Whitney expanded aircraft engine production and built plants outside of its East Hartford base in Willimantic and Southington. Remington Arms in Bridgeport produced 3.4 million rounds of ammunition per day. And the list continued. Vought Sikorsky in Bridgeport and Stratford made Corsairs for the Navy. In Middletown, Russell Manufacturing made 7.1 million yards of woven pockets used in armored vests and in machine gun belts. Stanford's Luda Marine moved from making pleasure craft to PT boats and landing craft for invasions. Even a tiny mom-and-pop machine shop in Coscob got into the act. Harry Powers and family earned an Army-Navy flag for production excellence. New companies brought fresh technology to bear on the war effort. Raymond Engineering in Middletown made test equipment for the proximity fuse, later used in the atomic bomb. Igor Sikorsky built the first production helicopter and delivered it to the Army. Above the Connecticut River in Middletown, Remington Rand experimented with revolutionary air-to-ground television transmissions for remote targeting. Shifts expanded everywhere to meet demand, first from 1 to 2, then to 3. In the early days of war, factories had to seek permission to work on weekends, particularly Sunday. Now, Saturdays and Sundays became routine workdays. Commuting to work was a nightmare. Traffic was so bad that companies staggered shifts to ease congestion.
We had to work 6 days, and we would get the 7th day off. And everybody had to go through that procedure. You know, you never had the same day off. You could start from Sunday, or we also would have Saturday. You know, it went down the line. Every 7th day we had off.
The accelerated pace of life and the movement of people into the state caused profound social problems. In New London, police sought to curb prostitution by detaining girls and women from out of town who lacked a visible means of support.
There were a lot of latchkey children during this period that had to shift for themselves because of it, and most communities were concerned about the social problems that came from that. And you do see communities making some efforts to try to provide daycare and to try to provide some sort of teenage outlets for them. But it did become a serious problem. Also, children working. I mean, they lowered the age limit on working in various places, and children 15 or so, even younger, were working during this period.
Teenagers were recruited to work in traditional jobs on farms, but they also found money could be made in factories. One foundry manager complained that under the law, children could fly raids over Germany, but not work in foundries at home. In rural areas, high factory wages and the draft quickly drained Connecticut's farms of hands. Tractors, replacement parts, and other fixtures of the farm were in short supply.
But I can remember being so tired, getting up in the morning and crying. I was so exhausted from work, but there was no giving up. There was a couple of days there when my brother and I worked around the clock so that the product that we were producing would not perish.
The Department of Agriculture deployed the Women's Land Army in 1943 to help farmers at harvest time. They eased the crisis. Teenagers were brought in from many parts of the country to help and lived in camps near the farms. They picked strawberries in Bolton, vegetables in Southington, apples in Middlefield, and both vegetables and apples in Litchfield. The drain of labor to factories meant that help in hospitals for the mentally ill and the infirm evaporated. Education, too, was not immune to the drain of men and materials. One-room schoolhouses were still in use in rural towns such as Ledyard and Avon. Newtown reopened its one-room schoolhouse for fifth graders.
We had a wood stove that the teacher had to keep going. They'd bring a jug of water every week, I think, for us. And there were outdoor bathrooms and no playground at all. We just sort of ran around the schoolhouse. And there were cows in the field next door.
As the war shifted into high gear at home as well as on the battlefield, the term necessary man emerged. Bakers, farmers, food distribution workers, skilled machinists were so described to keep them from the draft and on the job at home, even if they wanted to fight.
At 43, I was 21 years old and married. And they interviewed me, and they classified me 2C, which was the farm exemption. They said, you're more important on the farm than you are in the Army. You can do more there. It took 18 points to qualify for an exemption if you really wanted to qualify for an exemption. And a point was 1 cow. In other words, if you had 18 cows, you could get by, or the equivalent in broilers to 1 cow. So they had it all worked out mathematically as to what each point was. Well, you needed 18 points. I had 88 points. That's how much work we were doing. So you can imagine the hours that we were putting in.
In January 1942, the Farrell Birmingham Company of Ansonia sought to transfer William Lane from active duty in the 43rd Division to the plant as an essential key employee, a necessary man. The War Department agreed. Lane was free to return to civilian life. On a hill above town, Lane announced his decision to neighbor, co-worker, and friend Florence Woodford while on furlough. Woodford and other workers from the plant had attended Lane's going-away party when he entered the service.
The lights twinkled in the valley for miles round about. It was all so peaceful. And Bill said, "Florence, I want you to know and understand why I chose to stay in the Army, why I must now go and fight the Japs. It is for you. It is my pleasure, my privilege, and my duty. Believe me, they're going to pay for the time we can't go skating and dancing and to work together. Don't you understand? You must, because that is why. Florence Woodford, Ansonia, Connecticut.
The 43rd Division moved out that fall for action. After helping to capture the Russell Islands in February 1943, Lane and the 43rd Division headed for Rendova and Munda in the New Georgia Campaign.
Dear Florence, I got the V-mail letter from you yesterday in which you said you had subscribed to the Reader's Digest for a 2-year subscription for me. Thanks a lot, Florence. I appreciate it a whole lot. I only hope I can read most of the issues back home in an easy chair. Your friend Bill. William Lane, June 15, 1943, somewhere in the South Pacific.
Woodford replied on July 5th.
Today we are up the river. We've swept up all the oak leaves, wanted to clean up for fear of fire, and brushed the limbs off the roof, etc., so that we can keep the shack upright until after the duration, when we'll all enjoy it again. As ever, Woody. P.S. I visited a quaint little church and there was a book to put names of these in the armed forces one wished prayers for. I put your name down. God keep you. Florence. Florence Woodford, July 5th, 1943.
Military postal officials returned the letter unopened. Lane was aboard the Liberty ship Aludra outside Guadalcanal at dawn on June 23, 1943. A Japanese submarine found the ship's silhouette against the sunrise and attacked. The torpedo found its mark. Lane and other soldiers who hitched a ride on the ship to return to their units were killed. The increased tempo of work, shortages and rationing, social problems, and the always present sense of sadness and loss dampened the enthusiasm of the first months after Pearl Harbor.
Everybody was tense. You didn't know what you were going to hear next. Listen to the radio. We didn't have TVs. And of course, some of the announcers had that way of talking so that you felt there was doomsday coming. No, it wasn't a comfortable time.
President Roosevelt framed the terms of war in January 1943 at a conference in Casablanca with Allied leaders, including Britain's Winston Churchill. War would end, Roosevelt said, when Germany and Japan surrendered without conditions. He asked Americans to sacrifice even more than they had already to achieve that goal.
That was probably the most painful experience that I had as a mayor. When the draftees were assembled at the City Hall and they were registered and given cigarettes and Bibles and so forth, and they marched down to the railroad station. And I made it a point to go down there and speak to them, just briefly. I mean, you couldn't make any oration, but to bid them farewell. And especially around 43, it was a grim experience.
As the war entered its third winter in December 1943, bad news from the battlefront seeped into everyday life in Connecticut. Nazi Germany remained lodged and defiant in continental Europe. Imperial Japan held most of its gains in the Pacific.
Within a year to 2 years, practically every brother, anyone related to you, your boyfriend, they were gone. No one tried to get out of it. They just went.
At Burton Hebe's newsstand on Main Street in Bristol, local inductees deposited their hats for safekeeping. Hebe displayed the hats on the wall and promised servicemen they could retrieve their hats at the end of the war. The number of hats on the wall grew, as did the list of young men who would not return to claim them.
I remember going into Cuffy's, which was the big newspaper store in Old Greenwich, and to find in the headlines that somebody I had grown up with had been killed in the invasion in the Pacific. That was later on in the war, of course. But that was the thing you always dreaded.
For the first time, the government ordered fathers placed on draft eligibility lists in October of 1943. The need for men was too great to keep them home.
That's when my father was drafted in the Second World War. He was 36 years old. Then it got rough. We didn't have a lot of things we needed. We didn't have shoes. We didn't have coats. If we had money for the shoes, we didn't have the token because you had coupons or tokens to get things at the store.
Connecticut Governor Raymond Baldwin resisted federal orders to draft fathers. Throughout the rest of the war, Baldwin openly resisted government orders he thought harmful to the state.
Baldwin was, I think, an interesting figure as a wartime leader because his interests were not to take a second place to federal dictation.
Towns and cities erected temporary honor rolls on village greens as a public registry of local residents in the service. Gold stars were affixed next to the names of the dead. Resolve to see the war through never wavered, despite the painful reminder of its cost.
Of course, 43, Italy was really tough. And yes, I mean, it's good. They had the song, "Goodbye, Dear, I'll Be Back in a Year." And that was early on when they had a one-year draft. But of course, it changed markedly. But I thought it was significant that there seemed to be acceptance, that there was certainly no demonstrated opposition or vocal opposition. I mean, everybody seemed to take it as something that had to be done.
Letters connected the home front and troops in deeply personal ways.
We went to work, and the conversation usually was, "Did you get a letter today from your fiancé or your boyfriend or your brother?"
Catherine Wicks wrote so often to her brother, James Thornton, that technical details became second nature. Thornton was shot down over Germany. He survived the war in a prison camp.
You could be writing letters, and they could be dead. Because it's a couple of weeks or so before you'd get your letters, or you'd hear from them. You look for a letter all the time. I knew his, like I said, his serial number was 201-26598. I just will probably never forget that number.
Letters declaring the breakup of relationships were common in the mobile circumstances of wartime. But for Sylvia and Sidney Glazer, letters across the war zone in the Pacific started a lifelong romance.
There were a lot of war romances. Some of them didn't last, some of them did. But it was not unusual. Remember, for the soldiers, there was a dearth of women, and for the girls, there was a lack of men. And we were at the teen and early 20 ages in the 40s. And this was just the right time where romance blossoms.
Telegrams rapidly sent information to and from the war zones, but rarely contained good news when directed toward the home front.
In the movies and everything, you see
somebody ringing your doorbell and, you know, like an officer in the service or somebody handing you a telegram. Well, this was under the door, and the minute I saw it, you know, his being in the service and flying, I expected the worst. I was afraid to open it. So I ran over to the local grocery store. Somebody said, "How's your brother?" And I said, "I don't know. I'm afraid to open this telegram." So I opened it over there, and it said he was missing in action.
One night at 12 o'clock in my little cottage or bungalow in Cromwell, I heard the doorbell ring, and my little palm went wild. Well, she came to the door with me. She was going to eat whoever was there. And it turned out to be a taxi cab driver from Middletown. I slightly knew him, but he knew me. And he said, "I have a telegram for you." Well, I almost fainted. And I took it, and I thanked him. And I sat down to read it. And it said, "Your husband has been wounded, and he's in Germany." That's all they told me.
In the Pacific, the 43rd Division and its contingent of Connecticut National Guard, fresh from victory in the Russell Islands, moved to New Georgia and Rendova in late June. There, it attacked a heavily guarded Japanese airfield at Munda. The division took the airfield, but at tremendous cost. Lieutenant Neil J. Doyle, a Roman Catholic chaplain from Waterbury, was mortally wounded during action in Munda. He had been administering last rites of the Catholic Church to dying soldiers when hit by enemy fire. The loss shocked Waterbury.
It affected the people because he'd been a particularly popular and sympathetic priest, so that it did affect people very much. But it was just something that had to be survived, had to be surmounted until victory was won.
The first Allied plane to land on the Munda airfield, taken by the 43rd Division, was a Connecticut-made Corsair. At home, the threat of German attack diminished. Volunteer observers who had manned airplane spotting posts around the clock since December 1941 were told to stand down in October 1943 by the Eastern Defense Command. Radar would guard the skies. The dim out of seacoast lighting ended in November. The Civil Defense Corps would respond to domestic disasters, however. The Hartford Circus Fire of July 1944 mobilized thousands of trained volunteers to meet the emergency. Fuel and food remained in short supply throughout. In the winter of 1943-44, 43,000 people called temporary fuel offices to report that they had no coal left and were freezing.
That fuel shortage was, I suppose, the most painful of the problems, and that was a shortage of kerosene. And where there used to be 50 or 60,000 gallons a day consumed, it went down to 5,000 gallons. And the people that suffered were the simple people at the bottom of the scale, because that's how they heated their tenements.
In 1944, with Connecticut near starvation and with little fuel to warm its homes, the War Production Board added to the crisis. It threatened again to rescind all new contracts unless the state found more workers to meet production demands. To rally the workers already on production lines, elaborate ceremonies were held to issue Army-Navy E awards for production excellence. The ball bearing industry received particular attention. The War Department produced a movie on the importance of bearings. and held its premiere in Bristol.
This is the tale of a trifle. This is the story of one small part, one of the thousands of unsung trifles that go into the making of our fighting weapons. This is the biography of one of those fragments, the life and death of a small steel ball.
Celebrities such as Jimmy Durante visited ball-bearing plants too. When Meriden was named a top war community, Durante showed up. The War Department opened a rehabilitation center for blinded soldiers at Avon Old Farm School in 1944. Local girls attended dances and cookouts to entertain the veterans. But the injuries suffered by the men brought the reality of war home.
Young men were coming home maimed completely, and it was heart-wrenching. Our group danced with these young men who were uniformed, able to dance, but blind. I really enjoyed dancing with them, but at the same time, I felt, this is it. I won't do this again. I won't dance with any more strange young men. I'm going home, and I want my brothers to come home. I want my best friends to come home, my classmates to come home, my cousins to come home, and that one special person. That's all I wanted.
Hopes for an end to the war soared on June 6, 1944, when the Allies invaded France on the Normandy coast. Victory seemed imminent, but Nazi Germany counterattacked. The ensuing Battle of the Bulge ended talk of victory celebrations. As Allied forces closed in on Germany, shortages of food worsened at home. The Army requisitioned all chickens from the Delaware, Maryland, Virginia area, triggering a virulent black market on poultry in the Northeast. Many Connecticut poultry farmers openly defied orders to stop selling above ceiling prices. In response, Governor Baldwin ordered state police to stop chicken trucks en route to New York and seize their cargo. Baldwin then directed that the chickens be dressed and given to state institutions that were desperately short of meat. Still, shortages of meat and fuel persisted through the end of the war.
One man came to the farm looking for broilers, and he was pleading with me to sell them price. I said, gee, I can't sell them on the side. And the man was crying. I didn't know whether he'd be an OPA guy or a person that was honestly in need. And he says, look, I've got a family of 3. Will you sell me some chickens? And I sold him 3 or 4 chickens at that time. But the man was crying that he wanted the meat for his family, and that's how hard it was.
As Allied armies closed in on Nazi Germany, President Roosevelt died. He was elected in 1932 and re-elected 3 times. Roosevelt once said that he felt a neighborly attraction to Connecticut because he could see the state from a bluff at his home in Hyde Park, New York. Vice President Harry Truman succeeded Roosevelt. After stopping the final Nazi offensive of the war at the Battle of the Bulge, Allied armies regrouped in early 1945. They swept through Germany and reached Berlin by spring. Victory in Europe was declared on May 9th. Attention turned to the fighting in the Pacific. The invasion of Iwo Jima was brutal and costly. Determined Japanese defense of Okinawa meant that any attack on the home islands would take tens of thousands of American lives. The invasion never happened. American B-29s dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in early August. World War II was over.
people were out on their front porches with pots and pans and slamming them together and banging on them with spoons, and toilet paper was thrown from one side of the street to the other. It was everywhere. They had built bonfires, and everyone was out just yelling and screaming and cheering. We were so happy.
Demobilization of the armed forces lasted well into 1946. Huge passenger liners brimming with soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen were greeted by thousands on both the east and west coasts.
The day my father came home, I think we were in school because we were just so excited. My mother felt that it was best if we would go to school, and when we would come home, he'd be there. And he was.
The returning veterans had more than the homecoming to cheer. A year before the end of the war, Congress passed the GI Bill. The act provided low-interest mortgages and college tuition payments, among other benefits. The GI Bill eased widely held fears that the return of millions of veterans would trigger massive unemployment and the onset of a new depression.
That is, I think, one of the most tremendous federal actions in history. I mean, anybody who served in the services during the war could get a college education, and people took advantage of it tremendously. Think of the colleges in Connecticut that sprouted, Bridgeport and Hartford and others, to take advantage of that. Here at the Danbury State Teachers College, it was called then, it exploded in size because of returning veterans. They could get a home with a very low mortgage because the government was grateful to them and wanted to reward them for that.
The end of gasoline rationing brought cheers to Connecticut's fuel-starved motorists. Once again, free to roam the state's highways, thousands took to the roads. Rationing of other supplies eased as well, and factories soon began to produce consumer goods. Home construction soared as returning servicemen married and started families.
I remember the marriages starting in, was it 1945? You couldn't get a place. You had to call ahead. You had to really make arrangements for your marriages, because there was 3 marriages at a time on a Saturday. There were so many people getting married.
The 43rd Division and its contingent of Connecticut soldiers fought their way from one end of the Pacific to the other during the war. The men who stayed in the service served as part of the occupation force in Japan. About 210,000 Connecticut men and women served in the military during the war. Almost 2,600 were killed in action. Hundreds more died of disease or from accidents. Another 500,000 worked in the state's war plants, including almost 200,000 women. More than 80,000 people learned first aid. 102,000 volunteered for civil defense. The state's factories became racially integrated. Women were accepted alongside men on the production line for the first time. But segregation persisted in housing and lasted long after the war. Most of the factories that served as the arsenal for the Allies turned into relics within a generation of the war. The large ammunition, brass, and ball bearing industries moved in search of low labor costs or closed altogether. For the aircraft engine and submarine construction industries, the immediate onset of the Cold War with Russia generated fresh opportunities for long-term defense work.
The war really did turn us into a military-producing garrison state, really. And that has been both the strength and the weakness of the economy.
Wesleyan returned to its pre-war routine with one exception. It built housing for a typical post-war student, a veteran married with children. The wartime governors followed different paths afterward. Robert Hurley, who led Connecticut in the fearful days after the Pearl Harbor attack, withdrew from public life. He died in 1968. Raymond Baldwin served in the U.S. Senate and in a number of public positions until he died in 1986. John Danaher of Meriden, who opposed intervention in the war until Pearl Harbor, lost his re-election bid for the U.S. Senate in 1944. He died in 1990 after serving as a federal judge for more than 30 years. In the end, citizens on the home front managed to strike a balance between sacrifice and self-interest. They drew the line when thought necessary, particularly over federal attempts to restrict where they could work. On September 11, 1946, President Harry Truman offered relatives of war dead a choice to bring home remains or leave the bodies in military cemeteries overseas.
I remember one of the fellows, our milkman's son, who was in my class too. He went over, and his friend Richard went with him. And Warren didn't make it. Richard came back and told Warren's folks, you know, it was sudden. He didn't suffer. And he was buried over there somewhere in the Philippines. And I remember after the war, his father sent for the body. And my mother said, why don't you let him rest? No, he said, if it was yours, you'd want him back here too.
Funeral ships plied the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans into the early 1950s. Many wanted their loved ones brought home. Soldiers wounded in battle live with pieces of shrapnel lodged in their bodies. Memories of war were hard to shake.
My husband was a very nice person, and sometimes after the war, I would see him sitting in the living room and he'd have a tear in his eye, and I'd say, honey, what's wrong? He was a gunner on a mortar, and he said, you know, Peggy, it bothers me so. I wonder how many people I killed. He wouldn't kill an ant. He was such a good person, and this really weighed on him, and I think it weighed on him till he died.
We went from silly girls to caring young women. Just like the young men that had come home, they went to work as boys, and they came home men.
In the small Connecticut town of Lebanon, the war did not end in 1945. John Bennell was one of the first casualties of the war, dying of starvation in a Japanese prisoner of war camp as a result of the Bataan Death March in 1942. His mother, Jessie, did not hear of his death until 1945 and had never seen his grave. In May 1965, U.S. Senator Thomas J. Dodd and his wife Grace visited the Manila American Cemetery in the Philippines, half a world away from Connecticut. Dodd sent Jessie a photograph of Plot C, Row 9, Grave 81. The war was finally over for her.
worked hard to be a better doctor. I worked hard to be a better businesswoman. I worked hard to build a better practice. How can I make sure my money works hard so I can spend more time just being a better person?
At Lincoln Financial Group, we offer clear, understandable financial planning to help you protect and enjoy the work of a lifetime. Lincoln Financial Group, clear solutions in a complex world.
Genesis Elder Care. For over 16 years, Genesis, through their owned and managed centers and assisted living facilities, has been providing rehabilitative and long-term health care to people of all ages, with locations throughout New England, on the web at ghv.com.